Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another history of horror slash Halloween makeup tutorial. Today, as you can tell by the title, we are talking about Frankenstein, and this is one of my favorite topics, so let's get right into it. In 1818, a young author by the name of Mary Shelley wrote Frankenstein, and since then, the monster has appeared in several movies and shows. And I would just like it to be noted that this is considered the first sci fi novel, despite what other people say. Yes, it is true, a teenage girl wrote the first sci fi novel, and don't let anyone tell you any different. Since then, the monster has appeared in all kinds of things, and the idea of creating a monster and reanimating it from the dead. There are so many movies and shows that I can't go in depth into all of them, but I'm going to mention as many as possible and touch on kind of our keynote productions. So, the first film was a silent film released in 1910. The movie was only 12 minutes long and was a very loose adaptation of the book. It wasn't until 1931 where we got the release of Frankenstein, and was one of the most influential adaptations of the literature, and of course was part of Universal's kind of heyday of big monsters that we're seeing a resurgence of right now, which is amazing, and kind of cementing Frankenstein into this history of horror timeline that I've been talking about for like 3.5, 4 years now. The monster was portrayed by Boris Karloff and helped lead the movie to being a huge box office success. Frankenstein had the iconic "It's alive" line and created a lot of the tropes that we see in other movies that later on would become kind of staples of this Frankenstein genre. In 1935, Universal released The Bride of Frankenstein and introduced my favorite monster to audiences, the Bride. Contrary to popular belief, the bride is not magically in love with Frankenstein right away. She is actually afraid of him, and the monster kind of tells her to run away just like everyone else does. In 1939, we saw the release of Son of Frankenstein. Bela Lugosi is actually featured in this movie as Igor, the man who controls the monster and who is reanimated by the original Dr. Frankenstein's son. If you are unfamiliar with the name Bela Lugosi, I suggest going back and watching my Vampire History of Horror, because he is the original Dracula from Universal's monster universe. Now, in the 1940s, there were a ton of Frankenstein movies, including Frankenstein Meets the Wolfman and Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein. This was during a time where a lot of the monsters were doing crossover events, and a lot of big names were coming into the horror space, and even Bela Lugosi played Frankenstein during this time. In the mid to late 50s, there were a fair amount of Frankenstein's adaptation, but the most notable portrayal came in 1964 with the release of the Munsters sitcom. This is kind of the big one of the late 50s to early 60s. This was just a cute, cheesy, kind of family-friendly show. It's a great show, and you should definitely try and find it and watch it sometime. It was only on for like 3 seasons, but it's a great show. Like a lot of horror icons, though, Frankenstein was adapted into these weird, cheesy, and some flat-out bad films in the 60s. There were 17 shows and movies that featured the monster in the 60s alone, and in the 70s, there were 23, including Young Frankenstein, starring Gene Wilder, which, of course, was a huge success and has kind of a cult following at this point. The Rocky Horror Picture Show is also included in this kind of category, even though it's a much looser adaptation. The reanimation trope is in the movie and places it in a Frankenstein kind of place, and obviously Dr. Frankenfurter is a play on Dr. Frankenstein. But things did not cool off in the 80s. There were 18 movies and shows that were released, including The Monster Squad, which also has kind of become a cult classic and featured many Universal horror icons. And of course, there is Scooby-Doo included in all of this. The monster appears in Scooby-Doo and the Reluctant Werewolf. Frankenstein had 20 adaptations or served as reference to movies in the 90s. Most of these were very loose references, like Dr. Finkelstein in Nightmare Before Christmas, and the monster appeared in Alvin and the Chipmunks Meet Frankenstein. Now, in 2000, we had Monster Mash, and that just kind of started the long list of Frankenstein adaptations for the 2000s. One of the most notable ones that's kind of getting some attention right now is Van Helsing from 2004, starring Hugh Jackman. Frankenstein is featured in that movie. And then in 2008, Frankenstein got a family-friendly twist with Igor, the animated kids film, and over 20 movies in the 2000s had a Frankenstein connection. In the 2010s, we saw another wave of films, but many were more family-oriented and geared towards kids. There was Frankenweenie, of course, the Hotel Transylvania franchise features a Frankenstein monster in it, and the kind of ripoff of Hotel Transylvania, Monster Family, came out during that time, and that has had a few movies as well. In the last 4 years, so talking from 2020 to 2024, there has already been 12 movies, including the Munster movie and Lisa Frankenstein, which is already kind of getting this cult classic label to it, which I think is very cool because it's a very fun, fresh take that kind of makes fun of 80s horror while also talking about the classic horror. So it's one that I really, really want to watch, but I have not gotten to yet. I know, I am a bad horror historian. But there's also a ton of Frankenstein references in other kids shows right now. Of course, we have Monster High, we have Frankie Stein. There are so many books that feature Frankenstein like creatures, or I should say Frankenstein monster creatures, because Frankenstein is not the name of the monster, is the name of the doctor. The monster is just referred to as the monster. One of the biggest developments kind of across horror right now in terms of these kind of vintage creatures and characters that I talk about a lot on here is that Universal is bringing back their dark universe with the new Frankenstein movie. I know Andrew Garfield's in it. I believe Oscar Isaac is in it as well. And it is being directed by Guillermo del Toro and is all being shot in Scotland right now. And I've seen some TikToks about it, and it looks like it is going to be really amazing and gothic and kind of more towards the book than some of the older movies. So I cannot wait to go see that. The movie is supposed to be coming out in 2025, so hopefully that will not get stalled and it will do well so we can keep having these dark universe characters, because the last few, we all know the Mummy did not do well, the Invisible Man did not do super great, so hopefully we're kind of on the resurgence end of all of this stuff, because I would love to have some of these movies really take off. Also, if you guys did not watch any of my other videos or you're brand new, I did talk about this before, but Universal is opening a Dark Universe park. This is all going to feature Frankenstein and Van Helsing and Dracula and the Wolfman. So all these characters that I've talked about over the years are going to be in a theme park, and you can believe I'm going to be there. I will vlog it. I will give you all the tea when I finally get there. It's probably going to be a little bit because it's supposed to open in November, and I can only imagine how busy it's going to be. But I'm really going to try and get there and, film some cool stuff for you guys there and tell you how the experience went. Frankenstein's monster is featured very heavily in the ride, and I believe it's like Dr. Frankenstein's daughter is kind of the manufacturer of the whole story for that particular ride, but I know the Wolfman is in it, and I'm pretty sure there's Dracula in there. There's going to be a ton of characters in it, so it's going to be a really fun time. But Frankenstein really set the stage for sci-fi and this reanimation idea and the use of electricity to bring people back. The influence is kind of unmatched when you look at other characters. I would say the only other two that have probably made their way into popular media more are, of course, vampires and werewolves just because of Twilight and everything. They've had a more modern and more outright adaptation in recent movies where Frankenstein has been twisted and turned into a lot of different things over the years. And I'm not even 100% sure that Boris Karloff was green for any of this, but I just went with this kind of classic look of green because Frankenstein is always, or Frankenstein's monster, sorry, is always shown as being kind of green. And I think it's just the idea of skin decaying and the shock to it, how that would change color, and it all being kind of stapled back together, I guess. I did not look and see where the green came from, and I should have. However, if you guys want to see me do other looks, I have done a bride look before. I will try and link that. And I did like a traditional bride look a few years ago, and then I did a monster bride last year, if you guys were around for that. But I'll leave all my other videos kind of linked all over, so if you really want to just do a history of horror binge and learn about all these characters, you absolutely can. Let me know if there's any ones you want to see, because I'm kind of running out after this year. I kind of threw them all at the wall. So if there's more icons that you want me to talk about, let me know. I will try and do them as, soon as I get a moment to breathe after doing all this, or they'll make it in the next Halloween series. So let me know about all of that.